If Lewis Hamilton said something similar, I'd be like, what? What is he on about? What, you're not even interested? Forget doing, forget the action. But you ask the question, she says, well, you assume, as a first port of call, you assume that I'm even interested. Pull the other one, mate.
This is classic FIA F1 thinking, oh, if we do this, it will make it close. And it doesn't make a blind bit of difference. Teams are like, yeah, they're going to find ways around everything. They do it with the technical regulations. They're going to do it with cost cap regulations. It's how they work. You put a set of rules in front of them and they'll go, okay, they'll read the rules and then they'll look for the holes within the rules to try and get some kind of exploit going. That's what they do.
There isn't a magic bullet that you can fire at the Red Bull and peg it back. So the only way that this is going to work is if other teams catch up.
Do you think Fernando gets a bit of a bad rap of things? Is he on the bad end of a deal? Is he really a good guy in wolf's clothing, Baxty? 2007 in particular, we could jump on a Spaces right now, fellas, and relitigate for 2007. 95% of the F1 fan population won't know the Lewis portion of that story. They won't know that it wasn't Lewis was meant to give back the place and it was Fernando's turn to go. Lewis didn't do that, and hence there you get your vengeance story. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Shakedown. With me as always, my co-host Baxty and co-host Shez. How are we doing, fellas?
Doing good. Yeah.
No,
don't even think about it, Cameron. Don't even think about it.
I couldn't even pull it off today, mate. I'm too tired.
No.
How was your week away, Baxty? The subscribers missed you.
Yeah, no, it was nice to had a week away, seeing some family, and also had a wedding earlier this week of a very good friend of mine. Shout outs to my friends Cole and Alicia because they got married on Monday, and it was a really beautiful day. I was a groomsman for him, and it was a pleasure to be involved, doing a little bit of singing as well, which was nice. Lovely day. Got back about 3 o'clock this afternoon, so a bit tired, but here I am.
Here to talk some F1, and I love it. Go on then, first topic of the day, lads. I need to talk about Danica Patrick because I've got to be in my bonnet about this. Danica Patrick jumped on the Sky Sports podcast every Tuesday, of course. Decent podcast. Not even. I think they get a lot of hate from the diaspora, but I think it's a half decent podcast. However, on this episode, Danica Patrick said some very chaotic things. First, she professed to the interviewer that, you know what, in the past I've been a bit awkward and a bit chaotic with some of my responses, such as when somebody asked, how are you doing at Seattle or wherever their next race was, she was like, haven't you got any better questions than that, techie? But again, you wouldn't expect anything less from Danica Patrick since she can be quite spicy. Then she continues when they get onto women's driving or women driving in F1 and who potentially is the next one up. She responds, you assume that I even give a fudge. I paraphrase. That, Baxty, is an absolute madness for Danica Patrick to be one of three, oh no, there's a few actually, one of 4 or 5 women on the Sky Sports broadcast, if I can get my words out. For her to talk like that, so disparagingly about women in F1, I thought was quite shocking. Baxty, talk to me, bro.
Yeah, I mean, we've got to remember who Danica Patrick is. She is the only woman to win a race in IndyCar. She did have some skills behind the wheel, certainly in IndyCar. Her NASCAR career was not great. I think for Danica, she kind of went through the school of hard knocks and has like really fought hard to just prove herself against men without getting any real special treatment. She kind of went through the system and was the exception that proved the rule. And I kind of see what she was trying to say. She was trying to say, look, female drivers should go through the same pathway as men and we shouldn't be giving them special treatment. I agree with that to a point, but the problem is they're not getting the opportunities to race in the junior formula. So therefore, that's why the new F1 Academy and previously the W Series was so important, because you're actually giving female racing drivers the chance to race And I think the way that F1 have incorporated the F1 Academy into the feeder system to then have them go to F3, F2, and then hopefully to F1 within the next few years, that's a really good way of doing it. So I saw where Danica was trying to say, but she just bungled it and didn't quite get the point across that she was trying to make. But also not really acknowledging the wider problem, because it was almost like, well, I manage, so they should be able to manage. Well, no, it doesn't work like that.
Thank you, Baxty. Shez, talk to me about this, bro, because I think this is going to get techie now.
Yeah. Look, I think Danica gave a very raw answer. This is obviously, despite that particular quote, I think actually the complete opposite is true. She obviously cares quite deeply about this, because it's something that's deeply personal to her. As Baxty just said, that she's had to come up the hard way, and the problem that I think she is seeing is a real problem, is that it's difficult to get girls into the sport at the grassroots, and maybe the way that she said it wasn't completely legit, but it's not to say that there isn't something to what she was saying. If you look at the reasons that W Series was instituted, it was there to one, act as a focal point for girls to see that there are other women out there that are striving to be at the pinnacle of the sport, and to provide the women that are actually driving in that series to be able to progress further. But unfortunately, what happened, through lack of funding or whatever, you had one champion for the entire duration of that series, and she unfortunately didn't get any higher than an F3 seat. So you're looking at this at two different levels. You're looking at it in that girls are going to watch this and go, well, yes, there are women on TV driving cars, but are they getting to the pinnacle of the sport? No. Then how are you then finding a way to get them to come in at the grassroots?
Here, Shez, let me jump in on this, because I think this is a bit more simple than we're giving it credit for. I feel like Danica, in saying that, has climbed the ladder and is pulling it up behind her. How dare you, Danica, do one of these where you're, okay, so I've made it, so why would I want it to be any more easy for the next generation? Like, for her to say this is almost akin to Karun the other day talking about go and watch another sport, almost as egregious for me, Shez and Baxty, because I just think for her to say I'm not even interested, as like one of the as far as like women drivers in recent history, she's like she's the pole sitter. I think that's absolutely outrageous for her to say that. I think that's absolutely outrageous, Baxter. I can't believe it, bruv. Insensitive at best.
Yeah, as I said before, I don't think she phrased it particularly brilliantly. I think the general point of what she was trying to say made sense, but I think she just, I don't know. Yeah, you said she can often say silly things when asked questions. Well, I think she's done that here. I think she probably does want a female F1 driver. Of course, who wouldn't want a female F1 driver? That's something I think all three of us are passionate about. But I think the problem is that she was almost saying, like, well, I don't want them to be given special treatment, is what I think she was trying to say. But she kind of made it seem like she doesn't want a female F1 driver.
She was like, I'm not even interested. You assume, Matt, that I'm even interested.
Yeah, I think I don't think that's what she was trying to say, but unfortunately, that's how it's come across. And look, I'm not trying to excuse it. It was poor delivery, and it was you can't really say that. It's just dumb. But I think the biggest problem that I think I'm going to talk to a wider point here is that we've got this new F1 Academy, which is great, but there's been no broadcast deal for it. And you've been getting these short little highlight packages on YouTube, and that's about it. And apparently, from what I've been able to tell, there's actually quite an exciting championship fight happening in that series. I know Bianca Bustamante is doing very well. And look, they are getting more help from next year. Every team will have an academy driver in the F1 Academy. So they will give sponsorship to a female driver to drive in the F1 Academy, which is great. And you can see where some of the progress, Sophia Flörsch scored points in Spa just before the summer break, scored her first points in F3 and with a very, very good drive as well. So you got to shine a light on that. But F1 really shot themselves in the foot when they didn't have that broadcast deal in place. You want to promote this for girls and to show them that you can be a racing driver. Get a broadcast deal on it. Put it front and center. I know there were complications around who would broadcast it and everything else, and that's something to be sorted another day. But that should have been sorted way before. We shouldn't be getting it halfway through the season where we can watch these races live. It should have been on day one. We have a full broadcast. We have a full program ready to go. Commentators, presenters. Yes, they're at different tracks. Okay, fine, whatever. But it just had to be done properly rather than giving these 15-minute highlights, which seem like an afterthought.
Baxty, all I can do, is interpret this in a language that I understand, right? And I can't even imagine how bad I would feel as a junior driver if Lewis had got to the top, won his first world championship or first race even, to be totally equivalent, and then been asked the question, how do you feel about another black driver in F1? And he turned around and said, well, you assume that I'm even interested, Shez. Shez, that's chaos, bruv. Insensitive once again at best. I can't believe she said that.
I mean, it does speak to the fact that we hold sports people to a particular level, right? And yes, I agree that the way that was delivered was not right, but I also can't deny Danica's lived experience and where that's come from. If that is how she feels, and she feels that I had to work this hard to get here, why doesn't everybody else have to? That's how she feels about it. It's not me. I can't expect everybody to I can't expect even her as a potential role model. I can't expect her to be at the same sort of level as what I want her to be. She has no obligation to me or anybody else to be like that. It's just an expectation that you and I want her to have, and maybe it's unfair of us to do that. In terms of,
I don't think so, Shez. I don't think I'm not asking her to run marathons. I don't want her to be on the board of every women's drivers association ever. She was asked a very simple question, and rather than even just answer the question, it was a layup. Just answer the bloody question, Danica. She went out of her way to do exactly what she said she wasn't going to do, which is be awkward and difficult and question the dude. He didn't assume anything. He asked you a question, Danica, about women's driving, and you chose to go on this roundabout grandstand thing, talking about you assume that I'm even interested. What is that such a reach of a bloody assumption? This is something we should all be interested in. If egalitarian is something that we hold near and dear to our hearts, surely I don't know, because let me just say this as well, Shez, before I hand off to you for the final point. There are absolutely women drivers out there capable of operating in the upper echelons of motorsport. We know this for a fact because it's happened before, right? Layla Lombardi, Michelle Mouton was an absolute G. Wheel racecraft for days. Nearly did over Walter Roll, who is not a bad driver either. There will absolutely be women out there capable of handling a car with the best of them, right? The fact that there are so few even being touted as F1 ready is symptomatic of there being not quite a rupture in the system, but an imbalance. Let's say equality of opportunity isn't always equality of outcome, and I get that, but nevertheless, I think more needs to be done. And I personally would like to see someone like a Danica Patrick given her lived experience, Shez, at the forefront of that, not pulling the ladder up behind her, you know?
Yeah, sure, but Cameron, she's not obliged to do that, and
I don't disagree with you, Shez. All I'm saying is that I think it's a crying shame.
But I think you do have to look at the result of that, right? Is that if she's saying that, is that going to put off other girls from trying to enter motorsport and trying the ladder?
Shez, like I just equated it, right? All I can think of is that if Lewis Hamilton said something similar, I'd be like, what? What is he on about? What, you're not even interested? Forget the action, but you ask the question. She says, well, you assume, as a first port of call, you assume that I'm even interested. Pull the other one, mate. I don't know. Let's move on to the next topic before I blow my top. I just think it's incredible that, I don't know, the person that I think should be at the forefront of this cause, again, Shez, to your point, I don't want to superimpose my moral standing on anyone else because that's not fair. But I think it's a missed opportunity that Danica chooses to answer the question in that way. But I digress, chaps. Should we talk about some DRS? The rule is apparently going to be changed imminently about DRS in qualification. We on this podcast have talked ad infinitum about rule changes incoming with a view to peg back Red Bull. We know that Red Bull will have this triple DRS in inverted commas, that super aero efficient package, and that they utilise the wing beam somehow and aero store potentially. Shez, on hearing this news, how do you react? What was your first thought when you heard of this DRS ban in qualification?
Twofold, really. The first was that it was aimed at doing the very thing that I really don't want F1 to do, which is to impose a rule that ostensibly is there to peg back a particular team. Like they're only doing this because they know that the DRS on the back of the Red Bull is super powerful. And the second is, what difference is it really going to make to the outcome of a weekend when you're still going to have DRS during a race and Max is starting 9th and still winning race? I'm not sure it's really going to make that much difference. And even the DRS shut, he's pulling away from everybody else. And the final thing that really clinched it for me, and I'm sure we'll talk about it, is if you do something like that and it actually tangibly has an effect on Red Bull's form in qualifying, it cheapens things like what Lewis did agree to. He got that pole position, and you can talk about what happened in the race afterwards and what compromises had to be made to get that pole position, but that showed a level of commitment, skill, and ability to overcome like massive odds to get a pole position. If you then make it a bit easier to do, yes, you get more variety in who gets pole. But I think it cheapens it a little bit if you do it. Yes, you get the variety. I just don't think it means the same if you get pole innovation.
I don't hate that, Shez. Baxty, what do you reckon, mate? For or against cancellation of DRS in qualification?
I don't care. It's not going to make a blind bit of difference. Like, honestly, it's not going to do anything. This is classic FIA F1 thinking, if we do this, it will make it close. And it doesn't make a blind bit of difference. Look, Mercedes in 2020. Oh, let's ban party modes on the engine. Didn't matter. They were still quicker than everybody else by miles. Let's ban triple DRS because Red Bull have got this alleged triple DRS. Great. They're still going to kick everyone's ass in the race. Yeah, we saw that in a wet qualifying in Spa. Max was so far ahead of everybody else. It wasn't even funny, and he didn't have DRS. So it doesn't matter. Yeah, we've seen this with Mercedes, and we're going to see it with Red Bull now. The only time I've ever seen a technical directive actually work was at the British Grand Prix in 2011. They banned blown diffusers for that one race because then they all complained and they put it back in. And Alonso won. And it was like, oh, look, they banned something. We got good racing, but then they folded and everything went back to normal for the next race. Yeah, that's the only time I've ever seen it work. This is the FIA thinking, oh, yeah, we'll appease people by banning something, and it's not going to make any difference to what we see. Because, as Shez put it, you get it in the race, Max is going to go past you. It doesn't matter. Now, if they're talking about banning DRS completely and getting rid of it, that's a different conversation completely.
Oof.
But just doing it in qualifying, Max is only going to be on pole by 2/10 rather than 8/10. Great.
Baxty, I reckon. Go on, and let me try and argue the case for the FIA, because I've been on here more than a few times arguing for them just doing something right. Just do something. At this point, it's never going to be the panacea, but I think, Baxty, it's a step in the right direction as far, because listen, we talked off camera, right? There is a very real risk. There is a very, very real risk of all of these new fans who are here on the crash bang wallop contract that was the 2021 season, right? That's why they are here, and this isn't what they're getting this season. So I think the FIA and the FOM and Liberty Media have had to come together and had a bit of a rethink. Something had to get done, because ultimately we're going to be here, chaps. We've had this conversation a gazillion times before, right? We're going to be here as the old heads regardless. It's not us that they need to pitch to. They could put bloody bit like monster truck tires on the cars and run them around, and we'd still be watching, right? That's not nothing they do.
I would definitely watch that.
I would definitely watch that as well. Nothing they could do could turn us away. We'd all be watching still, like the greybeards that we are. But Drive to Survive, TikTok generation, they'll happily turn off. Talk to me, Shez.
So, look, again, a couple of points. The first is that whatever change you make is always going to have unintended consequences as well. Year one of these rules, they had the same length DRSs, and they found that DRS passes were becoming too frequent, they were too easy. So what happened? They shortened the DRS zones. Everybody developed their cars so that they were all a little bit better. And what happened? Now the DRS doesn't work because the DRS zones are too short.
But that's the iterative nature of the process, right, Shez? Surely.
Iteration, correct. Iteration. So it's not, I don't think, as I keep saying, the answer to this is to peg back Red Bull. The solution to this, and it won't happen this season, nothing will. Even if you have different drivers at the front of the grid in qualifying, it doesn't change the outcome of the race. These are not changes that are going to have immediate effect. What you want is something that over a season or two is going to start to bring things back into a level playing field. The ATR is one of those things that's already baked into the rule. The other, and I think actually the most important thing that's happened this week and over the Belgian weekend, was the fact that James Vowles, in a meeting of all the team principals, found that nobody really supported his idea for a capital expenditure allowance. That big problem here is that if you're talking about leveling the playing field so that there are more teams around to challenge Red Bull, don't give them the opportunity to be able to do that. And the capex expenditure is something that they can do to try and even things up.
Yeah, it's do we even get into this capex cost cap, Shez? I feel like I'm all capex cost capped out at this point. I agree with James on the capital expenditure piece, but cost cap as a reg is so it's so much of a, there are so many threads to pull at. Like it's already complicated enough and already very difficult, borderline impossible to police. To throw a capital expenditure cost cap in as a separate seg, flipping nourishes. Do you know how difficult that is to police? What quality? Define to me what capex is. What defines it? Because what you're going to get then, let me tell you what happens next when you put the capex portion in the finance regulations. All these bods, they're going to be trying to capex Adrian Newey then, because there's an intellectual property segment of his human resource that you could argue is capex. If he's building a car or like developing new technology, then you could make an argument putting on my accounting cap that starts under your capex. So it's just as if we've not got enough loopholes already, TD45 and bloody special projects and Mercedes Ineos Britannia and allocating, like, it's a nonsense. So I feel like it's already difficult enough to police. They haven't yet iterative, granted, but they haven't yet got their head around. They haven't yet got their head around version 1 even of the cost cap rules and regs. So for them, I don't know, chill out for a bit, James. Let's get this one nailed and let's see where the lad lies. And then potentially in a couple of years, let's revisit this capex stuff, because I think it's a tad too soon, mate. Already too complicated, these cost cap regs are.
I think the problem with that, though, is that, as you said, this is an iterative process, and the longer you leave it to make the changes, the further behind teams like Williams will get.
True.
And look, these, yes, I agree, it's a complicated system, but actually, if you look at it, it has had an effect, even if it's not the effect that they necessarily wanted.
Well,
but that's the whole point of this, is that you're introducing something massively complex and expecting it to work immediately. It's just not going to do that. And that's why there needs to be space to be able to iterate things going forward. And those things hopefully will bring things more to an even keel over time. And I understand where you're coming from. I understand that time is maybe something that we don't have, but it is something that if you want this to work, you need to kind of look at what's going to happen in the next 5-10 years, not the next 1-2 years.
Baxty, hit me on this cost cap very quickly, because I still feel like it's I've always been of the very noddy opinion. If you can't implement nor execute it properly, if you can't police it, then don't implement it right. It's too soon. And I think already they're struggling to police this thing. So to add further complexity onto the financial regulations when they haven't even got to grips with the first iteration is like, that would be a typical FIA thing to do, eh?
Yeah, I think capital expenditure, that would be tough. That would be, I mean, policing it right now is proving to be hard. We saw what happened with Red Bull last year. There was how much did they actually overspend by, and Aston Martin with their technical breach or whatever it was. Teams are like, they're going to find ways around everything. They do it with the technical regulations. They're going to do it with cost cap regulations. It's how they work. You put a set of rules in front of them, and they'll go, okay, they'll read the rules, and then they'll look for the holes within the rules to try and get some kind of exploit going. That's what they do. So be it with cap. Yeah, and that's the nature of sport. So anything that you put in their way is they're just going to do that. So
and that's what I'm saying, Baxter. As far as accounting rules, capex is like is like what classifies capex from what can't classify as capex is like. If you wanted a grey area that would make, like, if you're going to throw something at the existing cost cap that would make it infinitely more complicated and difficult to police, it would be the capex.
Exactly. I think they just need to leave it as it is. But I think, I think what they need to do is they need to tighten the rules. I've advocated for sliding scale cost caps. I don't know how you would make that work in principle, but that's the only thing I can see in my mind. That's the only way you can empower the other teams to do better to catch up to Red Bull, rather than, I know that's kind of pegging Red Bull back through financial costs and everything else, but it's the only way I can see them to do it. I think what you do is you set the baseline at Red Bull, right? Say, right, what I can't remember what it is for this year. It's like 135 mil or something.
Yeah.
No, so 135 million, right? Everyone starts at that. And then you go up in increments from P2 downwards, rather than saying to Red Bull, oh, no, you can only have like 80 million. No, everyone has 135 and then you go up. So that it still gives Red Bull enough to work with. They wouldn't be changed from where they would have been anyway. But that's the only way I can see you can do anything with the cost cap. I'm not the biggest fan of the cost cap, to be perfectly honest with you. I understand it in principle, but I just think it's kind of been put there because they want to try something. It seems like throw something at a wall and see if it sticks type thing. And we saw with Red Bull last year. There's potentially 3 teams this year. I'd be interested to see who they are. I'm not convinced. Not convinced at all.
Oh, Baxty. Shez, let me pitch something at you very quickly. Go on, Shez. You look confused.
Because, like, how can we say that the same three teams at the front? Aston Martin was on the podium 6 races in a row, and now McLaren are up there, like,
but
fighting
Baxty's
for
not. But
podiums.
but we don't care about second and third.
No,
Shez.
No, that's
You know
great.
what?
That's great. That's great that McLaren and Aston have been able to do that. But imagine if they had a bigger,
That's the
if
point.
they had a bigger budget.
There you
McLaren
go.
and Aston
They
aren't.
wouldn't have a bigger budget. That's the whole problem, right? Is that
But Aston could have a bigger budget. What I'm saying is, imagine if we were in the old
Sliding
regulations.
scale, yeah.
Aston would be able to compete. Certainly, Aston. I'm not sure about McLaren, but Aston could compete with Ferrari, Red Bull, and Mercedes. Because Lawrence Stroll would just be like, "You want money? Here's money."
Yeah, I think the value of the teams wouldn't work in that model. That's the problem, is that right now, you saw what Forbes had published a couple of weeks ago, right? That they reckon that Ferrari currently is worth $3.9 billion. $3.9 billion. They reckon McLaren is close to $2.5 billion. There's no way McLaren is worth that much when there's not a cost cap. It's just not possible. Like, the fact that there is, it's not. The problem is that if you're saying that you need that much sponsorship, that much money to be able to get like 100th of a second of performance, people aren't going to sponsor your team because it's a bucket that never fills up.
Go on then, Shez. Let me. I'm going to segue very quickly onto this sub note before we move on to our final topic today. I was listening to an F1 aficionado, let's say, who said the issue with trying to peg back Red Bull is the nature of their car, right? This isn't they've built a package where there's not one thing that you can take away from them that's going to level the playing field. This isn't double diffuser territory or blown off diffuser territory or X-Wing or DAS even. There is no one thing, or party mode. There is no one thing that you can pull away from Red Bull. Even with their DRS, they're still going to win handily, right? Because we know that they've been, I don't want to say sandbagging, but not necessarily going balls to the wall. Is the issue, Shez, with all this, that the car, holistically, the Red Bull car is too good and there's nothing that you can pull away from it to even the field? Is that the issue that we're dealing with?
Yeah, but we said this about six shakedowns ago, that if there isn't a magic bullet that you can fire at the Red Bull and peg it back. So the only way that this is going to work is if other teams catch up. I guess one of the problems with the rules, and it's maybe a little bit obtuse, is the fact that because we've moved to underbody aerodynamics being the performance differentiator rather than barge boards and overbody scoops and MacGuffins and things, the other teams can't see. So it takes them that much longer, and it means you need to wait for Checo Perez to bin it before you can actually see what's happening underneath the car. So it's just taking everybody much longer. I was listening to a podcast. You're going to laugh, but it's the race again. They do say some fun stuff. That they were talking about the height of the tunnels in the on the Red Bull floor, and that's what's giving them the ability to run the car wherever they want it in terms of ride height. If you can't see that, you don't know that's what's going on. And if you only get one opportunity, it then takes you another 6 months to develop your floor to do the same thing. So it takes ages to cotton on. But what are you going to do? Mandate that the floor, that the tunnel has to be a certain height?
Shez, is that even right, mate? I'm going to challenge, if that's what the racers said, I'm going to challenge them based upon Blake's latest video, because I don't think they can run the... I think that Red Bull car is still a little bit temperamental, which is why each and every single sprint weekend, they have less time to prep the car and always or regularly have problems setting it up right. Hence why Max Verstappen. Have you guys seen Blake's video? Sick video talking about, all right,
the sandbagging one.
Yeah. Have you watched it all the way through, Shez? Right. So let me try and summarize for Baxty. So Blake, obviously, for ex Red Bull employee, ex Max Verstappen performance engineer, GOAT settings, proper genius level guy. He went away and did his own due diligence on the telemetry of Max and Checo, and found out a couple of things. Firstly, they weren't using they were clipping at the end of the straight, Eau Rouge and Interlecom. Which is like, hold on. So they're not, what's going on here? Is it a sandbagging thing? What's going on? But he reckons that because they didn't have enough time to set up the car properly, and Checo Perez confirmed this in an interview with Spanish TV, by the way, that because they didn't have enough time to set up their car, they've put it, anticipating a wet race session, they've put the car too low, right? And anticipating, you've got that skid block that can only wear down like 1 millimeter or whatever it is. Anticipating that the compression through Eau Rouge and the Radion is gonna potentially wear down that skid block to where they might have a problem with the FIA post race. That those bods are both easing their wet, definitely not full throttle, like 75-80% through Eau Rouge, both of them, Max and Checo. You remember that Max came across the radio and was like, well, Giampiero was like, Max, use your head, I think he said. And Max responded, well, are we both doing this? Is Checo doing it as well? And he was like, mate, don't worry about that. Use your head here. I think they had an issue with the car being too low. Still think it's temperamental, that RB19. I don't think it's easy to set up each and every single time, hence why it excels when they're on a non-sprint race weekend. I think they need to still set it up a tad, hence why they had themselves an issue. Interesting. Aye. But that's why
it's degrees, though, isn't it, Cameron?
Say again, it's degrees over relativity.
It's not like
no, I'm not saying that it's not the best car on the grid still, but I think there's something going on that we don't quite understand there, chaps. I don't know if it's aero still.
But I mean,
so it's still by far the best package, but there is something going on with that car that we don't know about quite yet, and the other teams need to get to grips with, because I don't think it's they make it look easier than I think it actually is.
But I think that's the thing, though, isn't it? Is that I think before they start ironing out the problems, before other teams sort of start pointing fingers and saying, actually, it's a terrible car that they have these problems, they need to work out what the heck they've been doing in the first place, because it's the most aero efficient car on the grid at the moment, and that's what's winning them races.
Don't disagree. Super aerodynamically efficient, and therein lies the problem, right? I'm not sure whether DRS is going to be the answer that the FIA are looking for, and that casuals like myself are looking for a competitive race. I digress. Final topic of the day, Fernando Alonso. Is a brilliant article on BBC written by our mate Andrew Benson, and he goes into some depth on Fernando Alonso, almost leaning into this heel role for those WWE fans out there, the bad guy, alluding to a comment that he made on Drive to Survive Netflix's, that he's on the dark side, right, or something to that effect. Baxty, let me come to you first. Here's what I got from that article, because Andrew made repeated references to there being two sides of every story. I think he even wrote an article trying to give light to some of like Fernando's side of the story. Take 2007 Hungary as an example. Baxty, I'm thinking about Fernando leaning into the bad guy role, but do you think Fernando gets a bit of a bad rap of things? Is he on the bad end of a deal? Is he really a good guy in wolf's clothing, Baxty?
He doesn't help himself. I don't think so. I think the best way to judge a driver is often how they conduct themselves in the car, because, that's when the bias is down and that's when their brain is almost working at its fullest capacity. Hungary 07 is an example, when he saw the red mist, and look, Lewis was not innocent in that incident, but Fernando didn't have to give a receipt at that point. He could have let that one lie, but then got some back in the garage afterwards. But GP2 engine, that was poor. Then there was the comment about Lewis last year as well. He didn't have to say that, but he did.
That I don't hate, Baxter. I think I would have said something similar in the heat.
But the GP2 engine and the constant moaning when he was at McLaren, it's just who he is. And in every sport you're going to have heroes and villains, and Fernando is a villain. It's just as simple as. Yeah, there are people that support him. Of course they do. Of course they do. But I don't think he gets a bad rap. He's created his image, and now he has to lean into it. And I think he does that brilliantly. In fairness to him.
Well, this is the thing. According to Andrew Benson, he's made out like Alonso is acutely aware of this heel persona, that he's the bad guy, and in fact leans into it. But here's what I will go on, Baxty. Sorry.
He does blame the British press. He basically says it's all British press, and and I think it's not just British press. Okay, you're going to get sympathetic Spanish press because you're Spanish. That's fine. That's your home press. They're going to be nice to you. I mean, hello, look at Dutch media and Max. But I think it's just people will see. This isn't just a British problem. It's just that is who Fernando is, and that's how he's been cast, and he's leaned into it. Fair play to him.
I'd agree with you to an extent, Baxter. I don't think he helps himself. That for me is the headline in this scenario. But I do think he gets a bad rap. As I was reading the Benson article, I was like, you know what? 2007 in particular, we could jump on a Spaces right now, fellas, and relitigate for 2007. 95% of the F1 fan population won't know the Lewis portion of that story. They won't know that it wasn't Lewis was meant to give back the place and it was Fernando's turn to go. Lewis didn't do that, and hence there you get your vengeance story. I didn't even know. I only found that out like recently, chaps, like within the last 12 months. That wasn't something that was widely reported in real time by the British media. Let's be honest, that whole Lewis portion of the story wasn't something that was widely covered at the time. So I don't think Shez, Fernando is I don't think he's a gazillion miles away from the truth, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, Fernando is the villain until he's the hero, right? He's sort of classic, right? In that he's so uncompromising. Like everything that comes out of his mouth, every turn of the steering wheel, every press of the accelerator, press of the brake, everything he does is calculated to work out how he's going to get back to winning races and winning titles. That is every part of his being. I've never seen a driver more single-mindedly doing what he does, right? To everything is focused on becoming a champion. And you talk about 2007, but then you fast forward to 2012, and there wasn't a single F1 fan who wasn't, partisan for Sebastian Vettel, who wasn't cheering Alonso on. Like, I was devastated for him at the end of that season. I was devastated for him at the end of 2010. He should have been winning those titles. Like, where he wasn't a villain in those scenarios, was he? Even in the British media, maybe there wasn't a British driver who was up for a title in those seasons that he could that was equivalent. And maybe that's why. But yeah, sure, he wasn't the villain there. And even in 2007, Cameron, honestly, that whole Hungary thing, even at the time it was happening, I always felt uncomfortable about the fact that the FIA got involved in that and put him to the back of the grid.
It's techie. That's out of order,
mate. It's
apparently
you know why that happened.
Well, of course, but Fernando, let me just say this before you nail it, Shez. Fernando says in the Benson article that's and whether you believe him or not, that's up to you, right? But he said that's the only time team have ever lodged a protest against their own driver.
I mean, it was nuts. You know what happened? Freaking Anthony Hamilton, when he heard that the FIA weren't going to do anything, marched down to the FIA office and said, "You have to give him a penalty." You what?
Yeah, that's a bit fair play, Anthony, and of course he's acting in his son's best interest, but I don't know.
But the FIA aren't supposed to go, yeah, you're right. You're right. Let's give him a penalty.
Yeah, I don't know if that's due process. That's an intra-team issue, right? For the post-race debrief. Techie lads, as I think about it again with me old grey hairs, I feel like he's become like not quite an empathetic figure. That's not the right word, but like almost like an anti-hero. There's like he's not quite lovable, but you're kind of, I empathise with him, man. And I think some of those, you know what I'm saying though, Shez? I think some of those situations, 07, GP2 engine, bloody last year with, I would have said worse. If Lewis had crashed into me there, I would have said much worse than what Fernando did. Go on, Baxty.
I was going to say, he's kind of that character that you love to hate him, but you can't, and you want to ignore him, but you can't.
Yeah.
Because he's so compelling to watch.
Yeah.
Yeah. And look, we were loving it earlier this year. It's like, oh, Fernando's on the podium on the regular. This is great. You know, great to see Fernando actually in a car where he can show his skills. And then obviously Aston Martin are crap again. And we're like, screw Fernando. He's living salty since 07, you know.
Oh, mate. But notice Fernando though. Like his tone changes when depending on situations. So when Aston were on the up, great car, great team, everything's going really well. As soon as they're not, it's like this is the best qualifying session I have ever driven. This is the best race I have ever driven. When he finishes 5th. You know what I mean? There's always either
he's a chaos merchant.
Whatever he needs to do.
No. He's a chaos merchant.
I love that.
He's a chaos merchant, but I just feel like he's I don't know, if you're reminded of the battles with Schumacher, like he's a brilliant driver, right? There's not been too many better than him in all of F1 history, and I feel like overall, lads, I feel like he's gotten a bit of a bad rap down the years. Definitely, especially 2007.
Yeah, I agree with that. But you know why that worked? Even in 2005 and 2006, he was headed and he would say things that didn't need to be said, not necessarily to the press. But you know,
100%.
when the mass damper was banned in 2006, he went mental over that. There was another one where he lost pole in Monza because Ferrari protested him. They said that he was blocking Felipe Massa, and when you looked at the onboard, like Fernando was like a billion miles ahead of Felipe Massa, but it was withheld. And apparently he marched into some office, broke some doors, kicked some stuff, got really angry. And the team, knowing that this is what Fernando is like, they locked him in an empty cargo container, locked the door, and just let him get angry on his own. Then opened the door and said, "Calm down now. All right, let's go race."
I've heard about this.
That's how you got to manage the man.
Right, yeah, no, he does need some man managing. He does, but I just feel like, bad rap ever so slightly, lads, especially with hindsight.
Let's not also forget that he also supported Max Verstappen, so to all Lewis Hamilton fans in 2021, he was the Antichrist. Like, he's like, how dare you support the enemy, you... Yeah.
But he sees himself in Max, right? There are... Even
but there's no grey area in that battle. It's just you're either one or the other, and it's like, right, you're with them, enemy, bad guy,
friend or enemy in absolute terms. I think Benson. There's a really interesting portion of Benson's article on the BBC website where Alonso's like he's like kind of listing all of the similarities like between him and Max, and I think he goes. He says something that's completely not true about. Have you seen it, Shez? He says something that's completely false about like, I think he was talking about not having much support from his parents or something like that as a similarity. There was like, Benson was like, well, I don't know, everything that you said is right for Fernie up until the point where you're talking about lack of support, because Joss was there every step of the bloody way with almost too much support, right? I think Andrew said something about... There is the truth, and then there is Fernando's truth, and the two sometimes.
Oh, my truth! I hate that phrase.
Yeah,
there is only one truth, and that is the truth.
Yeah, I agree with that. The objective truth, but there is Fernando Alonso's.
My truth doesn't exist.
Yeah, not in that sense. Not in the objective sense, anyway.
But that's why it's fun to listen to.
That's when we get into subjectivity, which is interesting, especially on the back of current.
And I don't think it would be. Oof, yeah, I don't know about it.
Yeah, we don't want to really litigate for that, but I think subjectivity is important in 2023 in F1, because what we don't want to do is gatekeep the whole situation in the sport. and tell people how and why they should be watching F1. Go on then, finally, Shez.
Oh, all I was going to say was that none of this would be particularly interesting if Fernando wasn't a grade A driver. If he wasn't pulling results out of a car that couldn't do it, this wouldn't be a conversation. If Logan Sargent is talking up every one of his performances, you'd be a bit like, who is this guy?
How very dare you?
Sorry, Logan. Sorry,
Logan
mate. That was a low blow.
That was very low and very unnecessary. But you know what? Sometimes, Shez, apparently you've got to rattle some feathers. That has been another episode of the Shakedown. For co-host Baxty at BaxtyB on Twitter and BaxtyBF1 on the YouTubes. For Shez at ShezMed on the Twitters. I've been Cameron F1. Do me a favour, rate, review if you're listening on a podcasting platform. That all helps. If you're watching on the YouTubes, subscribe, comment, drop a like. It's all free and it helps more than you might know. That's been another episode. We'll see you same time, same place next week. Between now and then, do me a favour. Look, but never stare. Peace.